So good afternoon and welcome to our SEEP webinar, Consortium of Endowed Episcopal Parishes webinar about our Episcopal nonprofits and what the landscape looks like in this new reality of COVID-19. I'm glad to be here with you all and especially with our panelists. So I'll say briefly, I'm Elizabeth Marie Melchionna. I serve the Chapel of the Cross in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And starting with Scott Gunn, I might invite the Forward Movement folks to just briefly introduce themselves.
Sure, I'm Scott Gunn. I serve as the Executive Director at Forward Movement, and we're based in Cincinnati.
And I'm Miriam McKenney. I am Director of Development and Mission Engagement for Forward Movement.
And Mark, how about Living Church?
I'm Mark Michael. I'm the editor of the Living Church.
Sister Kristina Frances.
I'm Sister Kristina Frances, the Assistant Superior of the Society of St. Margaret, headquartered in Duxbury, Massachusetts.
Great. And Michael.
Michael Sullivan, President and CEO of Canuga Conferences in Hendersonville, North Carolina.
Wonderful. So as we begin this morning, I want to invite folks who are attending. If you have questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat box. But for our panelists, as we think about the ways in which your landscape has changed of late, Michael, your landscape looks beautiful behind you, seeing a little glimpse of Canuga. Our landscape has changed, and there are ways in which I am sure all of your organizations have undergone technical adaptations. If we think about the Heifetz-Linsky technical adaptive model of change, you've all had to relook at subscriptions and revenue streams and inability to have in-person gatherings. So I think we'd be curious to hear about what are some of those technical changes that your organizations have made, but also what are some of the adaptive changes that you've begun to undertake that may perhaps have helped you to be rooted even more so in your sense of mission. So I want to invite sort of each of our representative groups, if you will, to take a few minutes and just describe where you are. What do you see? So why don't we start with folks from Forward Movement?
Sure, thanks, Elizabeth Marie. So I think when this all started back in March, we at Forward Movement wondered, I think we had two questions. One is the natural question of how is this going to impact us and our work? What's going to happen to our revenue? But also the bigger question is what are going to be the new needs of the church? So we certainly have had the need to make technical changes. Our sales of books is down because churches aren't having book groups and aren't teaching classes, so that's to be expected. Forward Day by Day has kind of held its own. Some churches have canceled, but a lot of churches some churches have increased also, because they're using Forward Day by Day as a way to keep people in touch, delivering it or mailing it to people's homes. And of course, our staff started working at home, so we had to learn a new way to work together, and some of us were used to that and some of us weren't. So those are all technical changes or technical challenges. The adaptive one, I think, is one that just got accelerated, that we knew about for a while, and now it's on the front burner and we have we're facing it full on. And that's the shift from a church culture that's rooted in everyone getting in their cars or whatever, getting to church in person. Everything's happening. You're a Christian 90 minutes a week. You know, it's the kind of Christendom or late stage Christendom version of Christianity. And now we're moving to a disciple-centric model where gathering is essential and important, and I can't wait to do that again. But we're trying to figure out how to provide resources for people who are now focused on being Christians at home in a way that they weren't before. And I think Miriam might have things to add or corrections to make of what I said.
I have no corrections. I agree with everything that you said. I think, I think one of the adaptive changes too is having the courage to name your blessings in a time when there's so much, to put in an intercessory prayer. We still have seen some blessings coming from both of the pandemics that are going on right now. But so I think that people, as far as donations go, we have seen a decrease, which you would expect, but not nearly the kind of significant decrease that I thought. And I think that people are really searching. People are recognizing that they are the church and figuring out new ways of continuing to be disciples. And I think we've seen a lot of lay people stepping up into leadership roles. And so, for us as an organization, as Scott said, it's looking at how to support all of those efforts and how to continue to stay positive and also recognize all of the tragedy that's going on. How do we hold both of those?
Thank you all, both. Mark, how about for y'all?
Sure. So the Living Church has been publishing a regular magazine since 1878. And so kind of telling the news of the church is at the center of our life and work. And then over the last decade or so, we've also been having a kind of public teaching role in different ways, kind of convening conferences and a blog. And another part of our work has been always providing liturgical resources for the church. We have a book that we publish to help people select hymns and a resource for lectors. And so, when all of this happens, on the one hand, there's a tremendous amount of news to tell in the last, whatever it is, 5 or 6 months. And so one of the things that's been exciting is we've never handled this much submitted content, I think, in recent history. So people from all over the church sending theological essays to go up on the blog, people writing and saying, can I write some stories for you? So I've sort of had all these volunteer reporters in different parts of the church talking about the creative things that congregations are doing. We had one of our photographers was at the protests in Minneapolis and kind of putting together a photo essay. And we've got somebody going to the Navajo land later this month to kind of go around and understand the impact on that community. So as far as news goes and telling the story, it's been an exciting and an engaging time for us. Selling a book to kind of help people pick hymns is hard when nobody's having music at their in-person worship if they have it. And then also we had a significant kind of push to develop pamphlets, and pamphlets aren't moving at a time when you empty your tract racks because of contact. So that part of our work has been challenged, and our business model relies on advertising, and that's also been tough. I mean, a lot of our biggest advertisers are kind of retirement homes and people who do like trips. So those are not sectors of the economy that, are really thriving at the moment. But one of the things that's been exciting is, kind of producing new things. So we launched a weekly podcast about 2 weeks into this. I had a meeting on a Sunday. I said, send out a message to some friends and said, let's have a chat on Zoom. And we had people from all over the US and Canada and somebody in England, and just talking about what was needed. And so we've been able to, talk about how do you homeschool, talking about some of the racial justice issues that have come up, interviews with Rowan Williams about how does what does the Benedictine way teach us about sheltering in place. So that's been great. We're working on a sermon resource that will go out in a couple of weeks because we're realizing that priests who might have been able to go to libraries can't do that, and that preaching is even more vital now when that has to kind of carry the weight of worship and kind of forming our people because they can't gather physically for liturgy in the same way. So it's been creative and exciting, and people have been so generous. I mean, this is what it's been so moving to us, the generosity of the Episcopal Church and people. We've got a marketing guy we work with, and we had written a appeal letter as we send out a couple of times a year, and it was supposed to go out in April, and he said, well, nobody's sending these things out. And they're all waiting till it gets better. And I said, well, we really feel that our readers will care about what we're doing. And it was the best appeal letter we've sent out in years, the response that came back from it. So it's been really encouraging. There are deep challenges, of course, for the future, but we're grateful that God is giving fruitfulness in the current time.
Thank you, Mark. One of the things I've heard amongst the three of you all is that we're at an intersectional time of multiple pandemics in our society, of both how do we be anti-racist and how are we responding in this time where community life and contact looks so different. So thank you all. Kristina Frances, how is your community faring?
So we did have the advantage when we first went into the shelter in place of being basically a family unit. So the 7 of us here in Duxbury, we did not internally wear masks, and we have remained singing the offices throughout, as we SSM call it, COVID tide is our word for it. And so in a lot of ways, life went on as usual with our round of prayer. But what has really changed is that we are a blended community. We are apostolic as well as contemplative. So all of that going out immediately ceased, which has been really strange. And so it's been dealing with loss and change while sort of feeling so blessed to have a campus and a beautiful setting and not having children we're having to teach. I mean, again, there are people in really difficult circumstances and struggling financially, but acknowledging that what we're going through is loss and change. So our primary mission and ministry here in Duxbury is hospitality, which of course has taken a huge hit financially. We have made the decision to not reopen the guest program until at least 2021. We just don't feel that we can do it safely. And quite frankly, what we're sort of embracing is the identity of a praying community and actually intensifying that prayer. So both of those, the pandemics we're in the midst of, have been part of our normal prayer. We have a litany for the COVID-19, as well as an anti-racism piece that we've been using daily. So again, our focus really has been trying to undergird the church with prayer and support. And as everyone, I think there have been numerous articles written about we're all becoming monks and nuns in the midst of the shutdown. We have been sending out emails and being part of conversations about sort of the wisdom coming from religious communities to help people adapt to that new reality. So again, it's an odd combination of sort of the outward looking things looking very, very familiar, but really dealing with an institutional change. And now we're in the process of gaining some wisdom about online virtual offerings. We're hoping to do some musical things and some retreats and other things online, again, just to provide content for the people who want to be connected with us. But we're also going back to the old-fashioned phone call list. And so some of this is remembering the things we used to do when we had time, right? And now we have the time. So I would say we're really in the midst of asking a lot of questions about what is there that we already know how to do that we can intensify, and then what new things can we learn how to do to add more to support the wider church.
Thank you. Michael, in Cayuga, how goes it?
Well, I can certainly echo Kristina's remark that hospitality has been hit. It's been hit very hard. Most people that are on this webinar probably realize that Cayuga has been around since the 1920s, that we are the largest camp and conference facility associated with the Episcopal Church, that we are not a diocesan conference center. We serve the nation and really the world, the whole of the Anglican Communion. We host everyone from CPG, the House of Bishops, to years ago, the primates of the Anglican Communion, and then all the way to parish weekends and camp facilities and all the other kind of groups that come and join us. And so when COVID hit and we began to get cancellations and then realized that we would be closed for an extended period of time. To be honest, we calculate at this point that we have about a $7 million to $8 million reduction in revenue for 2020. This year, this time last year, our team consisted of about 270 team members. And this past week, we hit 19. And so the real economic impact of this on conference facilities has been tremendous and has been heartbreaking. I would also add that for us, we're one of the largest employers during high season in this county. And so the economic impact missionally, if you will, to our county and our region is tremendous. And then the 4 counties around Canoga are home to 70 summer camps. It's one of the largest concentrations of summer camps in the country. And so you can only imagine the compounding of that throughout our area. We did choose to reopen as of Memorial Day weekend, but we reopened with a very different model. And talk about pivoting. We basically opened for retreats and utilized our cottages so that family units could be set apart, if you will. Food service couldn't be in the dining room, so food was prepared and picked up to take back to cottages for service there. We couldn't gather for worship, so we did something that some people have loved and some people haven't, and the daily office is broadcast throughout the facility along with music. And so there's been a lot of adaptive change. What I would say for us was that Canoga was in the midst of what I would describe as a restructuring, rebuilding mode that had been multi-year. We had been going slow because change is hard for a conference center associated with the Episcopal Church. But what COVID has done is that it has exposed every area where the change had been too slow for decades. And it has made us far more vulnerable than we would have been if we had been, say, just a for-profit business. And so part of the reason I'm excited to be on this webinar and to be with others gathered in conversation is to gain some wisdom about the tension that exists between the requirements of a business and the manifestation of mission in the world. Because the pandemic has really changed the lens through which I see those things. So I'll stop there. And we'll jump back in.
Thank you. So for those who are watching the webinar, please feel free to chat in your questions. I've got the chat window up and can ask those of our panelists as you all would like to hear. I want to put out to you all both, I heard in what Michael was saying, this tension and challenge between living missionally and running an effective business model. And sometimes in church, we don't like to talk about the effective business model side of things, and yet it can so undergird and support the missional work that we're trying to do. If we get it right-sized and synthesized, there can be a lot of synergy there. And so I'm curious what that has looked like for all of you all. Michael spoke to it a little bit, but if there are others who could say more.
Yeah, we at Forward Movement unfortunately had to make a very difficult choice in July to plan some staff reductions. So 2 employees already left us, and we tried to do that in a way that was as grace-filled as you can make a lousy thing, to make a lousy thing as grace-filled as it could be. And we've got a couple more folks who will leave us in the next few months because, as you said, we had to get to the right size. When I was in parish ministry, I sometimes used to think about the burden of taking care of a building, and it's a little bit like keeping the budget, the revenue and the expense line in a nonprofit. As you say, it's not the mission, but it makes the mission possible. And if all we care about in church is the roof, we're missing the mark. But that keeping that roof repaired allows us to pray. And so that roof is really essential to the mission. It's the side dish, not the entree. And so this pandemic definitely focuses us kind of with white-knuckled intensity on looking after the business side of things so that we can carry out our mission while this is all going on, but also be here and be poised for strength upon strength, for generation upon generation. And we're all making it up as we go and praying.
I think we've had an interesting challenge of moving from a situation where all the employees are in one place. I mean, we've been in Milwaukee for over 100 years, but at this point, we only have one full-time employee there. And our employees are, spread out all over the country, working and connecting with each other digitally anyway. But we hadn't transitioned a lot of our business processes to reflect the fact that we were not all in one place. And our one employee was kind of rattling around in a suite of 7 rooms that was not needed. And so we actually started that process of moving from 7 rooms to 1 and reconfiguring some of our business processes in January. And then it really accelerated, of course, because we just couldn't. I mean, the one employee couldn't go to the place at the cathedral where we'd had our offices because of the lockdown orders that were in place. And so, one of the things we've been grateful about is that because we had already negotiated some new partnerships before COVID came, we were able to pay our bills on time to the new partners. But if we had been trying to pay the old partners, I mean, we would be way behind. And so I think part of one of the helpful things is about right sizing is that if you're in a kind of nonprofit world, or if you're in a church, you have a relationship with your fuel company that should be honored, and you have a relationship with the people who do your accounting and all these things. And so making sure the scope of your work arrangements with them are appropriate for your actual needs is just a really important part of being honorable. And I think that's deeply important to your mission as well. So we've learned that, nonprofits should not have more space than they need, especially in a time like this. And, having a handsome set of offices because you think this will impress visiting donors just doesn't make sense in the same way anymore. And so our new place is sort of in a little room over a coffee shop in the kind of warehouse district. We're still in Milwaukee, but it's a very different kind of atmosphere, but it seems more fitting for these challenging times.
Kristina Frances or Miriam?
I was just going to say, our operation, again, God bless you out at Canoga. My goodness. I mean, what an operation. And I've been there, and it's a magnificent place. And it's important for people to know what goes into running an institution like that. We were sort of in an odd place with our employees where we had very few full-time employees. So actually it came at a time when we were sort of reimagining our structure. So we've simply put more of our sisters to work. I have a crew, instead of maintenance, out picking up sticks from the storm. So, we have some advantages, again, being a community gathered together. And we also made the decision early on to support the local businesses as they reopened. So we've ordered Chinese food from Sang's down the street, and we've tried to do what we can do. Granted, it's just a small piece of the puzzle, but we definitely are very aware of how difficult this has been for places that are struggling. Like I said, the right size question is one we were grappling with before COVID and continue to grapple with, but at least our operations are on a much smaller level, so it's a little easier to kind of get there more quickly. But I think all of those questions, and again, our responsibility to each other, as you bring up about, yes, you have to pay your vendors. This is something that, the church, we prioritize those relationships with both our vendors and our guests, and that's part of our witness to the wider world.
I'd like
Michael.
to speak to two good things that we have learned so that it doesn't sound too dismal up here. First, I think that we in the church tend to take institutions for granted. This pandemic has helped us see the life of the church differently. And it has helped people prioritize where they believe the missional focus must be once we emerge from the pandemic of COVID-19. And for us at Canuga, in advancement or development, that has translated into more participants in our annual fund than we have ever had before, from all over the United States and abroad. And Episcopal churches and priests and parishioners and friends have given to Canuga for the first time. I mean, I will tell the story that we received a $20,000 gift from someone that had never made a gift to Canuga before, who came to Canuga years ago and experienced a transformation in their life. And so the positiveness of that, on the one hand, is that the church is seeing what it needs to survive in the future, and people are supporting with their stewardship institutions and programs that they believe will be necessary for the church to thrive. I'm going to say 2021 because I believe that 2021 and beyond, if not now. And the second thing I was going to say is that the other pandemic of race in America, Canuga has jumped right into, and we have pivoted. We've never hosted online discussions. But we launched a new series, Face-to-Face from Canuga, Conversations from Canuga. We've talked to the new Vice Chancellor of Swanee, former ambassador to the African Union. We talked to Randy Hollerath about his sermon about white privilege, talked to the presiding bishop. I've got Kelly Brown Douglas coming up, and then I've got the chief of police from Minneapolis as a guest. And so there are positive content things happening that are still gathering people. The word Canuga means gather. So we're having to figure out how to live into our mission in a time when we can't bring a conference of 500 people. So I want to just name those two things because I think they're really important for us to not just focus on the negative, but to hear how we are being transformed as well.
I just want to follow with that and say 100%. And I want to emphasize the now aspect of what you said. I've been in a lot of conversations in my diocese here in Southern Ohio about the emerging church and when we get back into our buildings and when this and when that. And my thing is, well, I'm here today. I'm here right now today. And I think that really is what is inspiring a lot of people to give and give generously. Because when we have a crisis situation, people want to help no matter what their resources look like. And people who have resources and have the capacity to give are looking around and saying, how can I help? So I think, I see a question over here asking of how to continue to engage new donors. And I think it's the same, that I would say that the answer is the same as how do we continue to engage our donors who've been with us a long time, and that is showing through our work, our relevance, and what it is that we are doing to help people to continue to stay engaged in their own personal faith life. How do we help people to be disciples? How do we help people to bring all of these things that we're struggling with back to our prayer life, back to scripture? How are we doing that? And when people can see that we are offering that in concrete ways, not only to the people who've been with us for a long time, but with new people, then I think that's where the support is coming from. Sometimes I'm mystified by it, but that's okay. It's a good thing to wonder about. But I think we just keep being our authentic and true selves and keep working to, as Mark was saying, create new ways. And as you were saying, Michael, and how to adjust but stay true to our mission.
Yeah. That recalibrating and yet staying authentic. It invites us to go deeper, actually, to sort of eschew what has, like scrape the barnacles off the boat, if you will. And I say that with full realization of the ways in which people's lives have been impacted in terms of job loss. So I don't say that carelessly, but I say that as we think about our mission to look at what's essential and how do we live into it in a new way. So we have a question from Christine Miller. Thinking about new donors and what are the mechanisms and tools that y'all are using to be able to stay connected and to help amplify the giving that has happened here initially?
A significant component of donations for us is a parish partnership program where parishes and dioceses become partners of the Living Church and make a regular gift to support our ministry. And we've sort of built up the kinds of things that we offer to those partners and have been communicating with them more regularly, sending them resources. Also for us, the podcast has been really helpful as a way to connect with some people who have things to share in a new format, and some people who've been long-term supporters have suggested, well, maybe you may want to talk about this, and then we go and find somebody, and we're able to bring other people into the conversation. So, I think for us, finding new ways of engagement digitally, which is our way of connecting right now, has been deeply important.
I was just going to jump in and say sort of a similar thing, again, as we're exploring the ways of being virtually connected. But really, in thinking about our donors, it's a fairly small percentage that actually are able to visit us on our campus. So at the last general convention, we began a new hashtag, Visio Divina. So the idea of gazing upon beauty as a prayer form. And so we've been doing on our social media now for a number of years, trying to give you the experience of being here through looking at the natural beauty of our campus. And so we began a mini missive, which we sort of were doing kind of every other week, just a breezy, newsy with some beautiful pictures and sort of updates on how the gardens are going and what seems like maybe trivia, but the response we got was incredible because I think, again, people are just looking for ways to be connected and to have a simple, quick thing they can read. It's not, there are lots of organizations. Some of you on here are the ones who are doing these wonderful theological reflections. But what we sort of felt like we could do easily and well was just that conversational tone. And then again, the sharing of the beauty that we are blessed with to have here in Duxbury. So again, we're feeling good about our donors going forward as we're finding that connection. But we know that they're really wanting now the next step, which again would be some virtual content with interactivity, as opposed to just reading something.
So Michael, I heard your extraordinary gift that you had from someone who'd had a transformative experience. How are you all exploring staying in touch?
Well, I think that stewardship follows mission, and a pandemic doesn't change that. And so you need to, at least from my view, you keep the main thing the main thing. What I think is shifting, however, is that those who participate in our stewardship are able to see us more clearly right now. And for those organizations that are able to adapt, that are able to pivot and still stay missionally focused to connect people, whether through a periodical or a publishing or a community of prayer or a conference center, they're going to stay connected to that because they're seeing the transformation. I've sort of laughed on other webinars that I've been on. I feel like I'm a parishioner of the Washington National Cathedral now because I attend the liturgy there every Sunday. But I've also attended probably 24 more parishes. And I've made some gifts to some places I would have never supported because they weren't my parish. But it's almost like COVID is allowing us to see missional activity more clearly because we have to be intentional in our own personal, going back to Scott's point, discipleship. You can't just go park your car, get out, and 90 minutes later, get back in and go have lunch. You know, make your sandwich, grilled cheese at home. You know, you have to pursue it. And so I would say to the question, find those things that directly relate to the core values of the institution and communicate those over and over and over in every form you can find. And I think that people will stay connected and will be good stewards of whatever mission or program we're talking about.
Thank you. Miriam, could you speak to what you posted in the chat box? And I will say, I have beautiful postcards that I have received from Forward Movement that I have up, you know, in places around the house or in the office that I will look at it and see the little Forward Movement, you know, 7-segment logo and think of you all. So in that way, I want to affirm it as effective. But
Good to hear. Yeah, I just am a real believer in, well, I was a librarian before I started working at Forward Movement 10 years ago. So story is really important to me. And I think it's important to everyone. We all have one. And I think that's why we enjoy stories. And so I think your storytelling is really important. As you know, are you effectively sharing the good news of your work with your people? And that, I think that good news is what brings people to want to hear more. And so that means you have to tell another story. For us, a lot of those stories come from people who write to us. And so I really am a believer in first person narrative. Like, let the person who we are seeking gifts so that we can help this person and people like this person. So letters that we get from people who are incarcerated, from people who are in the military, from people who are working in hospitals as chaplains or in whatever capacity, when they write to us with their stories, I feel like that's my work, is to share those stories and invite people into our ministry and make them feel that they are a partner with us, whether they're an individual or whether they're an institution. I think words matter. And pictures matter too. So the images that I like to share, you know, I want our donors to feel as though they have received a gift. But you know how sometimes when you receive something in exchange for the gift that you've given, and then you feel like, well, now what do I do? Do I give more? Or then there's people who feel like, well, I gave this gift and I didn't give it so that they can then give me something that I may or may not need. But I feel like a prayer card is in line with our ministry. We are a discipleship organization, and we believe in helping people cultivate their spiritual practices. So giving something that is the low-cost way to help people to connect with their spiritual practices, I think, is the appropriate thing. So I think as an organization, you can discern what that is for you. For us, you know, if we were to give a gift, a likely candidate would be a book. So We are a publisher, so we want to do things that are in line with our mission, and not make people feel as though the transaction has to keep going in that sense, but that their generosity and that in that spirit is something that they want to maintain with us. They want to continue to be a part of our ministry.
So I'm curious, each of you, I know you've had various staffing structure changes, some of them far more extreme than others in this last 6-month period, but how are you supporting your staff teams? And have you suddenly thought, you know what, we're going to go to all remote work for everybody? But I think a lot of us are asking that question of how do you continue to form a staff team and encourage folks while having them dispersed? So I'm curious what that looks like for each of you.
Yeah, this is really important to me personally, because I think taking care of staff, making sure people know that they're valued and making that real first of all, it's the right thing to do. And it also results in people work harder. So one of the things we've done is I ask how folks are doing. We gather as a staff every day at 10 o'clock online. We used to do it in our office, but now it's every day at 10 o'clock for Zoom. We read forward day by day together. We say prayers that we keep a list of prayers of intercessions that we, our staff, want to pray, or that people call us on the phone and ask for. We also, there's a place on our website, you can put in a prayer request, and whatever you ask us to pray for, we'll offer those intercessions every day, when we gather at 10 o'clock. So that's important for us. And we check in every day, how's everybody doing? But then we've also done some things like around Memorial Day weekend, we closed our office for an extra couple days to give people a long break. We're going to do that again over Labor Day weekend. And so it's, as our staff hears me say over and over again, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And we have to pace ourselves and not do everything today. It's okay if we have an idea and it takes a week or a month or 6 months, because we want to be here. We want to be smiling and grateful to be serving Jesus in 6 months. And, you just can't sprint forever. So we try to have that. I try to have that attitude and model that. And then we try to make it real. And the other thing is, people who are working at home now are meeting challenges. People who used to be able to just walk over to another person's desk and ask a question or show a paper, or now we're having to do that differently. So we're investing in technology. We're realizing that it takes longer. We're having to do things differently. And a message that I keep saying to others and to myself is we all have, I call it COVID brain. I mean, not literally a brain affected by COVID, but this pandemic does affect our thinking. And so people make more mistakes, people forget stuff, people forget deadlines, they miss deadlines, and we just need to be all about grace. So we're not doing it perfectly, but we're trying.
Mark?
I think that what I can echo a lot of what Scott has said. I mean, in our case, we were pretty much already a dispersed workforce already. I think this makes our accountant lots of challenges for him, trying to figure out whose state taxes he's supposed to pay. But we had been able to still gather as parts of teams every so often. A bunch of us were in Milwaukee in January, and then some of us were in Texas in August, and so we're missing those kinds of gatherings. We actually hired someone during the pandemic about 3 months ago, about 2 months ago. And so orienting him has been challenging, but he was a faithful reader before, so that helped. But it does pose questions for us about how should our personnel policy change to reflect the fact that pretty much everybody's going to be working at home. I mean, we still have one that sort of talks about, how you register when you arrive in the office. It's totally outdated. And so I'm kind of scanning the HR blogs periodically to see when they start saying, well, here's what you should say about working at home. And then we can rewrite things to take this reality we're living out seriously. You kind of write up what you're actually doing so that you have a common understanding of what's expected. So we're sort of parsing that on a ad hoc basis now, but it's clear that that's something we will need to do in a positive and forward-looking way, like so many other organizations.
Anybody else want to jump in on that question before we turn to another?
I was just going to add that on the grief side of this has been just a massive labor reduction. People who have dedicated their lives to the mission of Canuga and the reality that we cannot continue to support the expense. We don't have a large endowment. The giving has been good, but it doesn't support the personnel cost. And so there's real grief. What we have done is we have been as transparent as possible at every step. We have talked openly to our entire team. We have told the truth of where we are financially. We tell them where we are with the bank and in negotiations for the future. And the real heart, I'm getting teary, but you know, the number of people that in an exit interview say, "May I volunteer?" Has been one of the most grace-filled things that I have ever experienced. I'm changing the topic a little bit here, and I hope that's okay. I'm not the moderator.
You may, yes.
But I just want to name one of my fears. And I was with my team. Scott, we have a call at 11 o'clock every morning. And on our team today, we were talking about an idea that we'd had that might work and might not work. And what emerged from that was at least my fear of what it means to come out of this post-COVID and to have to reorganize and come back to life, and realizing that itself is going to be a process. You know, it's not like we're going to get a vaccine and then the next day everybody comes back to work and everything returns to normal. And it's a real fear about the process of coming out of this and doing it with integrity and authenticity and true to mission. I think there's probably for us a lot of letting go of things that didn't work, that we held on to. And, you know, one of the things I'm most excited about, but is also scary, is where are the new partnerships in ministry and mission for the good of the church? How are we going to work together in ways that we've not before? And that's where I place a lot of my hope.
So thinking about partnerships, I don't know who among you might have global partnerships. I know you have some global readership, but thinking about who are partner entities and organizations around the Anglican Communion and how are they faring in ministries that are either partnered with y'all's or are similar to. Because I can't imagine that a camp and conference center, you know, in England is able to stay open, or in South Africa, you know, all throughout the world. Have you all had conversation, collaboration? I know we've been keeping up with our global mission partners in the parish and each walking our next steps, sharing that together.
Yeah, well, a couple things. One is we are publishing a set of books in preparation for the next Lambeth conference, which was going to be Lambeth 20, and then 2021, and now 2022. So we've been in touch with folks there about making that all work and figuring out how to get resources around. We do some work. We print the Anglican Cycle of Prayer in Forward Day by Day, and so we work with the Anglican Communion Office on all of that. And I think people around the world are, at least in our experience, our partnerships, and then we have people who get Forward Day by Day all around the world. is I think people are having struggles that are different because every context is different, but similar in that people are facing shutdowns and remote work and illness and all those challenges. And what's remarkable, I think, is that in all of this, again, in our experience, there's been a lot of grace and a lot of, people haven't yelled at us if things are a little later than usual, maybe in a way that they might have. And there's been a lot of malleability and flexibility to work together, because we all know that we're, around the world, we're all getting through this together.
Right.
So that's been our experience.
Yeah, I mean, we have exchanges and conversations with other publishers of church news in other parts of the world. I mean, a thing that's, I think, impacted all of us is that the Anglican Communion news service has furloughed all their staff. And so some dear soul is going in and writing up sort of 3 news briefs every Tuesday, but that's it. And so, and we've offered to help out. I think there are limitations on, how other people can sub in because of the terms of the furlough. This was the British government has a pretty robust kind of salary support program in place for people who have been laid off because of the pandemic. And then conversations about things we were planning to help with for the Lambeth Conference, as well as Scott has said, being postponed. It's also been interesting that some of our sort of members of our foundation and longtime readers have been writing stories about what COVID is like on the ground in their part of the world. So we had a fascinating piece by Bishop Joseph Wandera, who's the bishop of the Diocese of Mumias in rural Kenya, about what it's been like there, and how the fact that people can't gather for funerals, which are such important communal events, has been taken a huge pastoral toll on the life of his community. And then they had a flood, and we were trying to help get the word out about their need for support, a flood in the middle of the pandemic, which was really tough. So we've, through those relationships we formed before, it's given us a sense of the whole world holding each other up in prayer at these challenging times.
Kristina Frances.
As a religious order, we are members of Coroa, which is an umbrella organization of the traditional religious orders in the Episcopal Church. And so we had our conference, of course, virtually toward the beginning of COVID tide. And then we've actually, SSM has been working with a couple of the other women's religious orders, sort of just as an ad hoc discussion group. And we have found it so helpful to be, this is, not formal partnerships, but just basically relational times to talk about all the different things that are happening within our communities, whether it's, again, donor outreach and finances, all the way down to how the individual members are coping psychologically with what we're dealing with. So, but we also, again, are hearing the same stories. And there is some comfort in knowing that, all the religious orders are sort of all in the same place with this. And it was one of the ways that enabled us to make our decision about the guest ministry, because there was, again, some comfort in knowing that we were all sort of making that choice together, even though it wasn't a formal Coroa decision, but it just made sense as we talked it through with the other orders who are similar to us. And then, of course, we have our sisters in Haiti, and that's a whole nother level of suffering that's happening down there with COVID-19. And unfortunately, communication is so difficult. But what we're hearing, they're doing the very best they can with the elderly ladies at the Foyer Notre Dame, and then are anticipating getting the schools. Believe it or not, the schools are trying to go back in August.
Wow.
Because the kids were out because of all the demonstrations that were happening last year. So again, it's been crisis upon crisis upon crisis there. So again, that's a little taste of what I think the parts of the rest of the world are facing, which really, again, we look at that and just think that's where we're sending our prayers. It's a really difficult situation.
So as you think about the future, I heard Michael name, here's a fear I have. Here's a place where I find and conceive in great grace. Where do you think you might have even greater impact in relationship to what you do missionally as we return both from COVID and as we restructure with the opportunity to put in place, anti-racist practices and policies and behaviors?
I think one thing, I got so caught up with the tail end of your question. I feel like I might have missed the first part, but it's okay. I'm going to go ahead anyway and
just go for it.
Say what I think. I think the biggest blessing for me as a Christian has been the reminder that we are not our church buildings and that we can practice our faith wherever we are. It's not like I didn't know that, but I think just as a whole faith community, at least in my parish, and I've seen in many others, that it's the struggle and it's the work and it's also the blessing. So, and another regarding the anti-racism piece, one thing that I believe and that Ibram Kendi said a couple of weeks ago in a talk in a presentation he gave that many people watched, I think like 60 or 70,000 people, he said, if we don't do everything we can right now to deal with this issue, we are going to regret it for the rest of our lives. Mm-hmm. History is going to look back on us and they are going to judge us harshly. And I believe that. And so what he called for and what I also am doing in my own life is whatever God has given you as your gifts, use those things to make a difference. I'm using my love of books and particularly picture books to do the work of racial healing and reconciliation and teaching people about some of these issues that are very, very painful and difficult. And I think that's just one example. That's where I find joy. So I think if we look at ourselves as people and the people within our organizations and say, yes, this is a transactional experience. I'm at a job, so I need to do the work that this job needs me to do. But what of that work can we do that brings us joy? Because that joy is going to translate into the people who are receiving it. So that's just, it might be a small thing, it might be a big thing, but I think if we all examined ourselves and said, what can I do to bring more joy to my work, that's going to go a long way for our faith and for our church and in our organizations.
Thank you. Mark?
I would, in terms of our hopes for the future, I think all of this has shown us that faithful teaching is really important. And the leaders of the church being able to speak clearly about the gospel and the hope that we have in these troubling times. And we feel like what we've been able to do over the past few months in developing new digital resources allows us to get that information to people that will help them to teach and preach in the church at a much more cost effectively and in a more accessible way. And so we hope that there will be ways to build in that way. And for us, I think, we have not talked as much about racial issues and racial injustice as I think we should have done. And so we've tried to kind of take this moment as a time to reflect on why that's important. We published what was, I think, our first ever racial injustice issue in July, and have been trying to lift up stories that address these issues in different parts of the communion. I was struck this week, we're printing tomorrow, the editorial that we wrote in response to the dropping of the atomic bomb 75 years ago yesterday, and calling it a kind of, I think the phrase was a revelation of the monstrous evil of the human heart, a pretty straightforward statement that this was deeply wrong. And we tried to do that in a different way in the editorial that we wrote in response to the protests happening all around the country in our last issue, trying to speak the truth and trying to help lift up stories of places where reconciliation is happening, and praying that we can be one, and that there will be justice for all people.
So we have just a brief minute left if anyone has a concise closing thought.
I don't know that it's a closing thought, but I just wanted to say that, Mark, that really resonated with me. I think that as an Episcopalian and as a priest of the church, I often felt that I had a Catholic theology with a Congregationalist praxis. This pandemic is showing us that we belong to one another. And that when I say we, all of us. And my hope for the church is that we will not squander that aspect of what we're learning, that we can break down barriers that have led to competition, that we can end sort of the polity governance canonical conundrum, and that we can be more of a missionally minded church, united in that mission. And I mean, I can't believe I'm at Canoga and I'm talking to a religious and I'm talking to the living church. And Ford, I mean, you know, and you're in Chapel Hill. This wouldn't have happened. This wouldn't have happened. And it's a blessing in its own way.
So we've had a request to close in prayer. And so I would be glad for us to do that. The Lord be with you. Almighty God, we give you thanks for those leaders with whom we've spoken this afternoon and those who are leading in all of their contexts throughout the country, throughout this network. We pray for resilience and fortitude and courage as we seek to grow deeper as disciples of Jesus Christ. Amen.